I appreciate very much the invitation and, just appreciate the chance to have this kind of, informal dialogue and share, back and forth. I'm going to try to present you some ideas. It is fine for you to raise your hand or question some of that. If it's a really dumb question, I will tell you that's a really dumb question. Then whatever it is that I answer is the right answer. So if we can kind of get that straight, I think we're good. Now, I appreciate very much, the Mid-Atlantic Foundation, Jack Brooks, his staff, and golly, I guess I have been in and out of this area now a half dozen times. And I told Jack today after he picked me up with the plane, and which, by the way, was 2 hours late, and it was just not good. Anyway, rushed me over here. I said, Jack, they've got to be getting tired of me, by now. And he said that pretty much was true. But they just couldn't get anybody else. And so I'm here. I think part of my challenge is that many of you have been to other events, venues where I have been, and have heard some of the things that I'm going to talk about. Some of today and tomorrow will be new. So beg your indulgence if you've been there, done that, etc. But they told you in advance it was me, and you didn't have to show up. So there we go. It's a little challenging for me with my accent to come into this part of the world and work. Next month, I have been invited to speak at Yale. And I've been wrestling with that. That invitation was offered up about a year ago. And then the lady who called me said, but we need to hear our speakers before they actually speak to us. I said, well, I was the New England Foundation was actually having me up in Massachusetts. And so I told her a date to upcoming. I'm going to be there. You're welcome to come. It's, oh yes. Well, she was there. Stayed the whole day. And told me when it was over, she said, well, you passed? I said, oh, I was so worried about it. And she said, we'll be getting you a formal invite. I said, thank you. And then, so that came, and we're contracted, and I'm to be there. Well, a few weeks ago, she called and said that there had been some discussion amongst the powers that be about my coming, and they wanted to know if I understood the caliber of audience that I would be addressing. Now, no one's ever asked me that before. And I have been wrestling with my opening line at Yale. Because they told me it was me and the Archbishop of Canterbury who were speaking that day. I said, usually I speak with Pope Francis, but if it's just the Archbishop, that's okay. But I'm going to stand in front of those folks, and I'm going to say that I was asked if I could adjust my talk to the audience that I'm speaking to. And I will share with them that I have adjusted my speech. It was not easy to lower my Arkansas self, but I believe I've made it as simple as possible. I hope that works. You don't think that's going to work?
No, I'm just anxious to find out how.
Well, I could get you an invitation, but you just, you just got to be, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you probably wouldn't understand, if you came. Anyway, I feel at home here. My accent may not be at home here, but I feel at home here. I mean, you Y'all's about as simple as I am. So that's the way it is. A lot of times when I finish, folks said, you really said it to where we understand it. And I said, I'm not smart enough to say it complicated. And this is just the way it is. So, I glance back at that. We're not going to stay on it. But Andy is right. When he and I first met, Horizon Stewardship was in existence, but the existence was just one person whose name was on the upper left. Horizon Stewardship is now worldwide. We have now one of our strategists in Singapore handling the teaching to Methodist institutions in Asia. I think that's kind of cool from just, little kid from Arkansas. It's not bad. Not bad. Take that, Yale. So. How you like me now? Why are we failing as a church? Why are we failing as a church? Now, some of you may want to argue we're not failing. But it wasn't very long ago that United Methodist Church had over 10 million people. Today, we're just under 7 million. We certainly have a lot less people. Are we more successful? Do we influence the world more? Are they listening to us more than they used to? When it is said that the Methodists have a word for Congress, do you think Congress hushes up to hear what we have to say? Why are we failing as a church? And I would say to you that we are failing as a church. The latest survey that I saw, and I did not put it on PowerPoint, but I was reading it the other day, says that Christians will now be a minority in the United States within the next 30 years. A minority. A minority. That the majority, the largest group behind us, we will still have the largest single number of the largest ones, but the second largest will be Muslims behind Christians. And you go back 50 years, and how many Muslims do you think there were in America? Very, very, very few. That group is evangelizing like crazy, and we have ceased to do that like crazy on the other end and have just flipped it aside. The third largest group will be those with no religion at all. We're failing. And we're failing in financial stewardship. I don't think there's any way in the world you can add up the numbers and say we've been successful there. Statistics don't lie, and these statistics came from the Holy Vatican itself, the General Council on Finance and Administration. For 2013, we lost 93,000 members. We're down 1.3%. We lost one 256-member church every single day of the year in 2013. That's the latest statistics. How many of you serve a church about this size? What's the name of your church?
Calvary United Methodist.
Calvary UMC. We lost a Calvary 365 times. Every single day, one of those churches died in America. That's not a thriving church. 4 annual conferences grew. Only 4. All of them were in the South. It's because, see, we're not smart enough to know you don't need religion. That's right. Texas, North Carolina, North Georgia, and Tennessee were the only ones who grew. The others didn't. The biggest loser was the Western jurisdiction. They now have less members in the entire Western jurisdiction than the North Georgia Annual Conference. We've had a worship decline of 2.1%. So that, there are those who would say, well, members don't really count. So the fact that we lost, all those members, that's not that big a deal. Participation in worship, however, also declined. The largest drop in worship was in the Northeast jurisdiction, which saw a drop of 2.7%. In the Western jurisdiction, it was 2.6.
Quick housekeeping. Will these slides be available to us?
They certainly can be. I did not, and I don't. Andy, do you have an answer to that? I wanted to know if the slides can be made available. Can
They will be made available.
okay?
We have your PowerPoint.
Yeah. I sent this to them. They put it up here. So
It will go out.
she said you will get it.
Thank you.
Okay. If you don't get it. Okay, so let's stop here for a second and you talk to me for a minute. Why did the Northeast jurisdiction lead in the loss of worship attendance? That's not what you wanted to lead in. This is you. This is what you are a part of. What is happening here that caused that?
Soccer practice.
Soccer practice. Okay?
Vacation homes in the southeast jurisdiction.
Vacation homes in the Southeast jurisdiction. Okay. You don't believe that totally though.
It is true in my congregation.
Retirements to the southeast.
So you're saying the population of our communities is getting smaller?
Southeast, we lost 5 families this spring to the southeast the moment they retired.
Moving
They
south.
walked down south.
Well, if I'd gone through the winter you had up here, that's okay.
People are attending less frequently.
Why here and not in Atlanta or in Dallas or Chicago for that matter? Okay. What?
Culture's different.
Culture. Tell me, how's it different? I ain't from around these parts, so help me.
In the South, it's still acceptable and positive to be seen going to church.
Okay.
In the North, it is not.
Why did that happen? How did that happen? The church was born up here.
Yes, but the North seems to be much more aware of the ambiguities of going to church means that if you are a Christian, you are viewed as narrow-minded, as judgmental, as not open to reality. And so there is they don't want to be seen in a church, and so they have other things to do.
Okay. Yes, ma'am?
We are not living our mission. Amen.
We're not living our mission. Tell me a little more. Just off top. I understand it's off top of your head, but go ahead.
We are not making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Why not?
How to make disciples.
Okay. Why not? When did it become acceptable not to do that?
We've forgotten our roots.
Forgot our roots.
We're focusing on the decline.
Okay. And so when you focus on the decline, what does that cause to happen?
Causes inward thinking rather than an outward evangelical focus.
Okay. But don't you need to recognize, oh golly, we're declining. Something's wrong. Why doesn't that propel us? Let me identify what's wrong and go fix it. Why doesn't that seem to work? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay. Sir.
No one agrees on why we're declining. We spend all our time talking to each other about this is the reason or this is the reason, and then we don't ever say this is how we fix it.
Okay.
I think going along with the culture thing, I think the culture up here has shifted, but I think instead of blaming culture entirely, I think the culture's changed and the church hasn't changed to meet the needs of that new culture.
Okay.
It seems to me that the church or the institution of the church up here in the Northeast wants desperately to hold on to that famous phrase, the way things were. And in this Northeast section, we're the most racially diverse, the most compacted cities in the world, right here in the Northeast, our churches do not reflect the rest of the community, but we're still trying to hold on to what used to be.
Okay.
And it just doesn't relate.
Yes.
I
really know that we're declining. I don't think that they think that their attendance is not stellar. I think they think if they come once or twice a month, that makes them incredibly committed. And so maybe it goes to that they believe that they're great disciples. They volunteer a little bit, they give a little bit, and they show up, what we would think is fairly average. And that's good enough.
And have folks wrap their arms around them and say, oh, it's so good to see you.
So great you're back, yeah.
Okay?
We're focusing a lot on members, I think. The idea that we want to grow, but the way we want to grow is we want to grow members. We don't want to ask people to make really strong commitments because they're burdened with so many other things on them that we try
Okay.
to take it a little bit easy.
All right. All right, well, is there anybody here who would say, we don't have a problem? You don't think we have a problem? Okay, go ahead.
Reggie McNeil said that we're looking at the wrong scorecard.
Okay?
So kind of what Meredith's saying, maybe we're scoring something different, and so it looks like it's failing.
All right, so give me some other measurements.
Numbers of communities where we are present with a school, healing ministries, number of kids that get to go to college, scholarships, using our resources to invest in people's lives being transformed and them transforming the world. Things that I still don't know how Reggie wants us to measure, but things that have to do with something more kingdom building than just tracking the number.
Okay? I've heard that for a long time. I've almost been a Methodist preacher as long as we've been declining, but not quite. We've been declining a little longer than I've been a Methodist preacher. In that I was in, the first church I was in 1972. We started declining in 1968. And we haven't had an increase since. And I have been hearing that we weren't counting the right things for the last 40-something years. And not to knock Reggie or certainly you for the comment, I appreciate it. But I'm still looking for what else should I look at. We're 3 million members less. We're a couple of million in worship down. And we do that every single year. And I guess I would think if we've been feeding them so good, and we have been transforming lives so well, and we have been impacting our communities, why don't they want to come to our place?
I think we have, in some sense, we don't quite have a sense of identity. This is what
We being the church?
the
or-
United Methodist Church.
Okay.
One of the beauty of the connectional table is it's so unique in that everybody is welcome to the table. But we've not been able to really capitalize on that identity.
Okay.
As to what that looks like.
Okay.
Like, if you go to a church down the street, they'll tell you everybody else is going to hell and you're the only ones going to heaven. And if they build their identity and they're selling,
Well, they got one.
whether you like it or
Yeah,
not,
right.
whether you agree with it or not, but they're able to very clearly communicate what their identity is
Yeah.
and what they stand for.
Yeah.
And as we as United Methodists, I feel like we are not able to articulate what that identity looks like.
Good point. Hopefully we'll come up with some sense of that. Here, let me move through this. The most generous states in the Union. Utah is the most generous. That probably doesn't surprise anybody. The next 9 most generous states in the Union are all southern states. And an interesting fact, and I really don't know what to make of it, but the 17 most generous states in America all voted for Romney in the last election. Now, the give, help, we have a heart for the underprivileged is more a message of which party? It's a Democratic Party message. And we're the little guys party, we're the everybody party. We're supposed to have the heart, Republicans have the brain, and Democrats have a heart, and da da da. But the most generous states all voted Republican. I really don't know what to make of that. I just thought that was an incredible statistic. Maybe totally unrelated. But all of the most generous states were all in the South. The second most generous state in America was Mississippi.
Really?
What is the poorest state in the Union? Mississippi. They average a little over 5% of their net worth they give away to others, and they're the poorest state in the Union. Now, the least generous states in the Union are all in the Northeast. New Hampshire is the least generous state in America. They give 1.7. It's compared to Mississippi's 5. And the bottom 17 states all voted for Obama, except for North Dakota and Alaska. Now, where are the wealthiest states in America located?
The coast.
Which part of America are they in? The Northeast. The Northeast. And with, I believe, the wealthiest state is Connecticut. But they are the least generous.
Least generous to the church?
No, least generous, period. Yeah, this was not a church survey. This was a survey simply done of generosity in America by Indiana University. Why would the wealthiest amongst us be the least generous?
Fear.
Fear that they won't be able to keep what they trust in the most, which is their money.
Feel like it's theirs. They feel
Okay.
like it's theirs,
Okay?
and where stewardship says it's not mine.
You think that someone in Mississippi has a better stewardship consciousness? Is that what I'm hearing you say? I'm to be more of a steward and...
There's a lot more to it than that.
Well, yeah. Okay. No, I understand. Yeah, well, and I didn't come prepared to fully diagnose all of it. I didn't get into the study that thoroughly.
This is more of a question, but is it possible that the wealthier states can give what looks like a lot until you get down to percentages, and then you realize it's not nearly as much? The widows might almost,
Yes.
So those who don't have as much give more proportionally.
That's what this said. I mean, they're giving more proportionally. Total dollars,
Yeah.
I am almost certain the residents of Connecticut will give more total dollars than the residents of Mississippi. At the same point, in many of our churches, the families earning more than $100,000 a year will give a larger offering, but the family making under $50,000, the nation tells us, will give to the church nearly twice, percentage-wise. And what is it that we are to count in the church? It's the proportion, isn't it? Not the total amount. United Methodists now give 1% of their income to the church. Latest surveys show of what Methodists have in disposable income, they give to the church 1%. That's terribly bad news, except for the fact that if we could just get it up to 2, we would double all of the money we have. Now that's, I mean, seriously, that's, we could double our resources for ministry if we could just get Methodists to get to 2% from 1. So why? The foundation paid me to come up here and to have answers. Yeah. You might be getting what you paid for. Yeah, because I have the answers. I think one of the key problems is we subordinate the mission for money. Somebody said earlier we forgot the mission. I was in a small group just this past week, and the discussion came up about doing radical things, and the church having some serious expectations, to the point that anyone who wanted to join would go through a series of classes where they would learn those expectations of prayers, presence, gifts, and service. And we wouldn't just make it a sentence. There would be a whole paragraph describing prayers and describing gifts and describing service. And if you weren't truly ready to meet that expectation, then you couldn't be a member. And the outcry was enormous. Enormous. And words were being said like, well, we've always been inclusive of everybody. How can we turn anyone away? What happened to grace? Why, how could any of us judge? Things that are kind of painful for a preacher to hear, that, you're not being graceful and you're not being inclusive and being judgmental. And any of y'all want to be that way? I mean, I don't. When it was mentioned that Jesus seemed to put the mission ahead of being nice, the response was, well, that's okay for Jesus, but not for us. I said, well, who's supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus today? Well, not me. I don't want to be a part of that. It was noted in this particular church that has a 9-month confirmation experience for 6th graders. Okay? 12-year-olds. 11, 12-year-olds. That one would be allowed to join the church if they failed to attend a single class, but actually showed up on the day in which everybody else was joining the church. And someone said, well, we shouldn't let them do it. We should make them go through the classes. And then it was noted that their parents would throw an incredible fit, that their child was denied the chance to join with their friends. And the conclusion around the group was, that's not worth it. Let them join. Maybe after they've joined, they'll get it. The entire discussion was, the mission is not what counts. It's trying to keep people happy. Because if they get unhappy, the numbers begin to reflect badly. That costs us money. When it costs us money, then we really get in a stir. And we do what we do to maintain an equilibrium that keeps us open. Now, that was my conclusion of listening to this discussion, which after it was over in this United Methodist Church, the decision was that no changes would be made. Now, I want you to think about your own churches. What would occur if you took into your church higher levels of expectation and began to talk more of discipleship than membership? That might even begin with the fact that at 12 years old, there's not a child I know who's mature enough to decide to commit to anything. I mean, would any of you marry a 12-year-old to somebody else? Oh, I thought she was raising her hand back there. That's good. I'm glad you weren't.
I gave my life to Jesus when I was 12 years old.
And obviously it took and was a good thing.
Well, not for 5 years. But God honored it.
I'm sure he did. My own wife argues with me about this because she's a preacher's daughter, and she says she knew what she was doing, and I wasn't there when she was 12, but she's darn near perfect, so it took. But I just think on the surface in general, I mean, I've seen, child prodigies play the piano at 5 too, but I don't think most of them are ready. That we water down this, what?
So then, Cliff, take that analogy of that confirmation class, that we want to keep everybody happy. Go back to 1968 when everything started to spiral downhill for the United Methodist Church, and you can ask yourself the same question.
Sure.
Have we as a denomination made everybody happy?
No, I think obviously we haven't made them happy. But my question is,
That's my point.
yeah, well,
I mean, so
but if we'd made them happy, I think happy being the mission
yeah.
hasn't worked. And I think what we're seeing from the Gen Xers today that I talk to people say, young people aren't coming. They don't see the authenticity and the uniqueness and the specialness or the requirement being anything more than I need to be a good person. I need to be concerned about feeding the hungry, and I am, and I go down and feed hungry people. And I need to do this and do that. That's a good thing to do. But what do I need Jesus for? And that's the only unique thing we have to offer.
Yep.
And we've so watered that down that they look around and say, Rotary Club does about as much. Yep. And nobody gets up and harangues at me on Sundays about it. So, okay, I almost started preaching to the preachers, and I need to watch it. Yes, sir?
You mentioned that the decline started about 1968, but
Mhm.
actually, as a percentage of the population, our decline started in the 1800s. And it happened about the time that we stopped requiring members to go to class meeting and be accountable.
All right, let's go. I'm reminded that this would be 45 minutes, and I heard the threat, which was it's free time for you when I'm done, which means, get done so we get free time. I think one of our big problems that has caused us to be where we are today is that leaders won't or don't know how to lead. I'm getting ready to write a blog article for our newsletter thing that goes out once a month, and I'm going to write about how it seems to me that leadership today in the church is acting a little bit more like Congress every day. We're trying to figure out where we need to be to keep our party happy or these folks happy in Congress. I don't think there's a whole lot of people there right now who wake up every day and say, what do I really need to do for America? And I'm concerned that within the church, we are waking up trying to decide, what is it that I need to do to survive in this job? To when I'm finished here, that in 3 or 4 years, I'll get one that's a little better, that pays a little more, that I can make enough to put kids through college or retire someday, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of doing what John Wesley said, I wake up every day trying to figure out how to save souls and what I need to do. And that means sometimes that we as leaders have to go counter to those who may hold our jobs and futures in their hands. And that's hard to do. Look, I had 4 congregations over 20 years. I don't want to speak like, hey, you just ought to go do it. Look, I know how hard it was to do that. And to know if I really bring this up, if I push this, there are those here that could make life really, really difficult. But somebody has got to start the ball moving towards change to where Jesus Christ is Lord. And that's all the argument. Not I perhaps will like it this way or that way. But Jesus Christ is Lord, and because He's Lord, I feel this. Someone has to start that. And our church members who aren't very comfortable with Jesus as Lord are just going to have to get over it or go on down the road. Now, when that happens, some of us are going to be on the cross. There's no question. Some of us will go to the cross. But if one guy hadn't gone to the cross, we wouldn't have this opportunity.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
I've been an intentional interim for, I think, five churches in 9 years.
Woo!
And as an intentional interim, it requires...
Oh, okay. So you've been an interim. Okay. You hadn't been run out of 4 of them. Okay.
The issue is you say leaders won't lead, but the system
I understand.
They have to manage the system and their rules, unless you're willing to break those rules, and if you don't have the support up, and you don't have it beside you, it's a very difficult thing for the pastor who is assigned to begin to move that system, to drag that elephant
Look,
up the hill.
I absolutely agree with you. I totally agree with you. I believe the system is broken. And oh, it is. It is. It's just broken. If you want, I mean, go to General Conference in April and you're going to see how really broken it is. But it is broken, and we do. You are absolutely And our system of all systems, the Methodist system, should be able to support and back that pastor. Should be. In the Baptist church, you preach a sermon against something they don't like, they can vote you out that night and you're history. It's gone. In the Methodist church, that's not supposed to happen, but it does. It just takes a little longer. But it does. And it does because the system that controls it doesn't often stand up and say, bang your head against this wall all you want. It ain't going to happen. If anybody leaves, you leave. The pastor's staying. That can happen with us, but it doesn't. And I think some of the reason it doesn't, anybody here a DS? Just thought I'd check. We got one.
We'll point it out.
We got one. Is he a good one or a bad one? You vouch for him? You vouch for him? Okay. But it is because at the highest levels, in many instances, they too sell out the mission for money. Okay. We have failed to value and use worship appropriately. Worship is the greatest expression of our faith, I think, that can be held. It is an opportunity to do so many things. To advance the vision and the mission, to learn and grow together with the reading of Scripture, to commune together at the rail, to be bonded together as one family. Whether there's one or two services or whatever, but we're coming to this one place, on Sunday. To use that experience as a high water moment. And folks, I hear too many preachers saying things to me like, when I say, how was last Sunday? It was one of those days. What happened? Well, there's just Sundays you blow off, and this was one of them. Sometimes I don't hear it, but I actually attended worship there, and it's rather obvious. There wasn't a whole lot of thought that went into the experience. It always humbled me. It was a humbling thing for me. I'm getting ready to stand up, and 500 people are going to shut up and listen to whatever I say. Dang. And some of them think I'm speaking for God. And I have told them by my ordination that He told me I was to do it. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's pretty darn powerful. I don't think I just don't feel like looking at God and saying, God, I'm just going to blow it off next week. But we don't use worship. This is our time to reach people in an incredibly unique way and to reach them as an advancement of stewardship. Stewardship is not a part of 95% of our worship services. It really isn't. We're passing the plate versus having a ticket taker out front. And that's the way people look at it. It's just kind of the traditional thing. Church people, they pass the plate. The movie house has a guy that, takes your money in the front and you get your ticket. And that's what they're looking at. They don't understand the stewardship of it. This is our chance to share with them how we're affecting, changing, moving, impacting lives. And in the vast majority of our churches, none of that gets mentioned in any kind of personal, warm, emotional, touching, heartfelt way. It does not happen. And all the nonprofit leaders that I work with and I talk to them, and most of them go to church somewhere, and they'll say to me, it never ceases to amaze me how the church blows it every Sunday when they have all their donors gathered in one place. Oh my gosh, if I had them there and an opportunity to convince them how we're doing good stuff. We fail to use worship as we should. We focus on members and not disciples. The big concern of this church that I was telling you that I was in, that was debating this confirmation experience and expectations, they were scared to death it was going to cost them members, Allah and money. There was no real consciousness of the fact that Jesus said, go forth and make disciples. You know, and there's that story of Jesus going from place to place, and it said the crowds were behind him and he stopped. It said, and he turned around to the crowd and he said, you know, in essence, I don't need Jesus groupies. If you're not ready, if you don't love me more than father, mother, sister, brother, if you're not ready to pick up your cross and on and on and on, and you know that scripture, he said, I don't need you because I need disciples. And I think that in our church we have gotten away from the making of disciples and saying to people that those gathered here have Jesus Christ as Lord. After the debate was done about confirmation, the discussion in this church got to the flag that's in the sanctuary. And the discussion was, would it be appropriate to say the Pledge of Allegiance in church to the flag of the United States of America? Now, I'm listening to this discussion and I understand that I'm a veteran, a combat veteran. And I have all the little combat patches and medals and ribbons and stuff to back that up. And I said, well, if Jesus Christ is my Lord, then America can't be. Nor can anything else. I can love my country. I can love my wife. I can love and appreciate members in my church. But Jesus is the only Lord I have. And therefore, I don't think in the church where we put the accent on Jesus being Lord, that we need to shift that allegiance to saying country can now be Lord. Oh my gosh. That was not acceptable. And it would not be acceptable because if we really say that out loud, people will leave. Because there's an Air Force base right outside of where this church was, and a lot of those people are military and value that and in lots of ways, and their store is open because a lot of folks in uniform buy stuff there and all that. We can't say something like that. The accent is on the membership and not on discipleship. And I think because of that, the world has looked around and said there's just nothing unique and special or authentic about them, so I don't need them. And we're failing. And in a very practical sense, we haven't dealt with debt principle. Some of our churches right now have a mission of simply trying to pay the debt on the facilities they are in. And that is their mission. And they have 30-40% of their budgets going for debt. And because it is so high and out of perspective, you know, it has made it very difficult to say we have a mission that is much higher than just paying a mortgage. And the world has looked at us and says, it's just not something I want to be a part of. That's a huge, very practical problem. We'll be talking about that some more as well that we've got. I think those are some of the reasons that I see directly that we're failing. So, okay. My time about up. Yes, sir.
Would you be with the very last slide you had?
Yes, sir.
With the last reference about debt?
Debt? Yes, sir.
Would you also be willing to substitute for those churches that have been historically around for hundreds of years, they have not dealt with the fact that their biggest cost is
The building.
care and maintenance of the building.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, I would get right back to saying, you know, what's the mission? What's the mission? Does this building help you do the mission? If it doesn't, abandon the building.
You're not gonna make them happy with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a host of other things in places too, but the most pressing is buildings, because those buildings cost so much money. But we have failed to capture that mission has to be first in all that we do, and lead off with that discussion. And if that doesn't do it, I watched a church that's in the Northeast that I work with. I watched that church with $2.5 million in its endowment as it went from 600 in worship to 50. They were able to do that by taking all of that $2.5 million every year as they had less and less people to keep that building alive. And they finally called me when that $2.5 million was down to $200,000.
Wow.
And said, we think we have a problem. Yeah. And you know, it just should have been shut down. It should have been stopped long before.
Which of these possible answers do you think is unique to the Northeast? Because that's where we started. There were some unique problems to the Northeast. So
None of them.
do you think are
None of them.
So then what's going on in the Northeast? Are we just a mess?
We're a mess everywhere, but you're a little more of a mess. No. I think, let me figure out how I want to say this. Understand, you know, when I said only 4 annual conferences grew, that leaves out a whole bunch of southern conferences that didn't grow either. Sure. Okay. And wrestle with that. The church as a whole, all across America, is in serious trouble for many of these reasons. I don't think the Northeast is unique in of itself, only in the fact that the Northeast is you know, it's unique from other parts, just like everybody has their differences. Part of what we have here, and I think was much stressed earlier, and somewhat in the Western jurisdiction, it has become very much the culture to not be religious, to not be in church. As someone said to me when I was in New Hampshire, and we were talking around the table, and they said, you don't mention the fact you go to church when you go to the supermarket. They look at you funny. Now in Arkansas, we're all talking about where you go to church. And if somebody said, I don't like church, the supermarket would just stop. And everybody go, what do you mean? So that makes it a different conversation. And so I think curing the problem is unique to some extent. But I don't think there's anything that I would say Mississippi doesn't struggle with this. Mississippi Methodists don't, and you know, Delaware Methodists do. No, I think we all have major issues centered much around that. And frankly, if I was to rank, which ones would I tackle first that would have the greatest chance of making the greatest difference, it'd be the first two. It's the refocusing on the mission and letting the money take care of itself. We're going to have to take a big bump. When we bring a change, it's going to hurt. But we've got to get back to the core of who we are. Jesus never wavered from it. And do that. And we're going to have leaders tough enough to do it. I think the United Methodist Church is uniquely positioned to do that. If we can. But no, as much as I'd love to say shame on you, I really can't. So, listen, my time's up tonight. They just gave me 45 minutes. I think I took 47. But in my churches, when I'd hit 12 o'clock, they were screaming for more. So I just kept going. We'll have all day tomorrow. We'll deal with it. Hopefully we'll have more answers and questions, but I'm looking forward to the dialogue. Thanks a bunch. Okay.